A trans shooter killed a 6th grade boy in Iowa last week, and it sparked the same kind of talking points we always hear when these things take place. Stop praying and let's control guns, or you love your freedom more than you love kids.
You filthy animal.
Today, we're looking back at a debate between Jon Stewart and Nathan Dahm on gun control to show that regressives are wrong about both. We'll talk about that and more today on Indie Thinker. Welcome to the show. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget, Indie Thinker is a tax-exempt organization. You can give tax-deductible donations to Indie Thinker, and you can do it right now by going to the link on the screen or going to the description of this podcast, where you can see a link to help us continue the great work that we do here at Indie Thinker. If this show has been beneficial to you in any way in the past, I highly encourage you to take a moment to give to this great work. A 17-year-old student at Perry High School in Iowa fatally shot a 6th grader and wounded 5 others on Thursday before killing himself. The reason you've heard little about this story is not because only one kid was killed and we need more of a body count, but rather because, once again, the shooter was trans. Screenshots from the shooter's social media account display LGBTQ symbolism, including rainbow and transgender flag emojis, and an image of graffiti that says, "Love your trans kids." The shooter was also linked to a Reddit account that commented on trans forums and an account that used hashtag genderfluid and he, they in the bio. Now, of course, the media is going to accuse right-wing actors like myself of bringing up the obvious facts that I just mentioned to you, and then we'll be called hateful, bigoted, and bringing up things that don't really have to do with the injustice of what just took place. However, I think it's relevant, and they obviously do too, because anytime they have the opportunity to make sure they can blame something on the right, they do so. When the narrative is convenient, they will quickly try to blame right-wing extremism, Christian nationalism, or something like that. Or if it's less clear, maybe less expedient, maybe there's a couple of items on the intersectional checkbox that are there, but others are not, then they will be quick to just say, quit praying and let's talk about guns. But then, of course, if the shooter was trans, as it was in this or in the Nashville case, they will be very quick to be as silent as possible and hope that this story can cycle out of the news as quickly as it needs to, as far as they're concerned. Here we are less than a year from the Nashville shooter, and we'll probably never know what motivation that young girl had because the media didn't want to talk about it, and the manifesto was not released and had to be released by other people in independent media. Suffice to say, we can always trust that the media will give us their version. And that version always sounds pretty much like what you're about to hear in this Jon Stewart debate with Nathan Dahm, who is an Oklahoma senator. I think it's very interesting. A lot of people online believed that Jon Stewart came out the better in all of this, and perhaps he did. But let's take a look, and then you can judge for yourself.
Just for clarity's sake, I'm not against the Second Amendment. I don't want to ban guns. But you're saying more guns makes us more safe.
Yes.
So when we got 400 million guns in the country, we had an increase and gun deaths went up. So when exactly does this curve hit that takes it down? Would 1 billion guns do it?
Let's just run those numbers. 400 million, 50,000. You're talking about less than a fraction of, not even 1%, of 100th of a percent.
But it goes up, not down. So your argument is backwards.
But if you want, okay, so let's come up with a solution. Okay, so one of the issues, a contributing factor, again, I believe it's the individual that is the problem.
So your solution to that is give them more guns.
So I'm saying that because people are the problem, we need to look at the problems that those people are facing and how do we address it.
But you've removed the ability for the state to do that.
No, because you're...
If you don't have background checks and you don't have registration and permitting, how do you know who has a problem in terms of the people who you're giving a gun to?
Do you want to talk about the background checks first, or do you want to talk about solutions first?
I want to talk about what you're doing is you're bringing chaos to order.
That's your subjective opinion, that it's bringing chaos to order.
It's not my subjective opinion. We have 50,000 gun-related deaths. That's not a subjective opinion.
Okay, so
that's dead people. Let me back up for a second. In every other place in your life, you want to bring order. But guns are the outlier for you. So let's start with immigration. You want registration maybe a wall, maybe not a wall. Why do you want that?
Well, one of the reasons is because the fentanyl crisis.
Right.
I mean, okay, but...
you don't know when it's coming across. So what do you do?
But the fentanyl crisis is twice what the gun death crisis is.
Okay, so until the gun crisis gets to the fentanyl level...
Not until it...
You don't want to bring order.
No, not until it. But
do you see my point?
If we're going to talk about protecting lives, that's a larger issue in America than guns is. If we're talking about individual lives of ways that they can be protected, loss of life in America, there's loss of life through fentanyl. There's loss of life through obesity. The obesity crisis in America costs 6 times the number of lives as guns.
Right, and so, you're the guy saying, you know what would help this? Ice cream.
No. So, you know what would help the problem that we're facing with firearms?
What?
The fatherlessness crisis that we have in America. If you look at the statistics...
Right. Yeah, they're dying from gun deaths.
80% of school shooters either came from a broken or fatherless home.
So you would say no guns for fatherless homes?
No, that's not what I would say. I would say that fathers need to be more engaged.
Great. So let's
crime with a firearm if they don't have a father in the home.
Let's put more resources into areas that are poverty-stricken. All for it.
And into fatherlessness, and that's something that we're doing in Oklahoma. But
why with guns are you against bringing order?
I'm not against bringing order.
You are. You're also making it less safe for cops and for people. When the police go to a domestic call, it's the most dangerous call they can go on. In your world, if they knew that there were firearms in the house, that's a safer call. Is that what you're saying?
No, because police...
Because why?
Because police treat every situation as a potential...
But more guns makes us safer. So why don't, when the police go to a house filled with guns, why don't they breathe a sigh of relief knowing that this Second Amendment that shall not be infringed is being exercised so fruitfully in this home?
Are you familiar with the 39-year-old woman in New Jersey?
I'm familiar with a ton of anecdotes. I'm asking you a simple question.
This is not an anecdote,
When
John.
the police go to a house...
She had a restraining order on her ex-boyfriend.
I can run through hundreds and hundreds of examples of women killed by their domestic partners by guns that were not taken away through the lessening of red flag laws. You're pivoting to anecdotes.
No, this is not anecdotes.
What the police say, if we had gun registration, if we were able to track purchases, they have a technology that every bullet would be stamped with an individual like a fingerprint. If we had an ATF that wasn't defunded, we would be able to enforce gun laws more effectively, and we would be able to solve gun crimes more effectively. You're against all of that.
Because the person is the threat, not the firearm, not the knife.
I get it.
The person and the individual is the one that is the concern here.
But you don't want anything that could help law enforcement or society determine whether or not a person is a good guy with a gun or a bad guy with a gun.
Even
the
law
registry
enforcement
would allow you to have much more effective background checks. So I don't understand why you won't just admit that you are making it harder for police to manage the streets by allowing all of these guns to go out without permits, without checks, and without background stuff. Why is that hard? Why can't you just stand by that?
Because that's not what I'm doing. I'm defending the individual's right to keep and bear arms.
That's a different argument.
Okay, but
you may do. Here's what I'm saying. You want to say I'm a Second Amendment purist and I'm making it safer. You're not. You're making it more chaotic, and that's not a matter of opinion. That's the truth.
That is a matter of opinion, John.
But why take away their tools?
Because certain of their tools that they're using would be infringements upon the people's right to keep and bear arms, upon their constitutional rights, upon due process, upon other things.
That registering is an infringement?
Yes.
Okay. Is voting a right?
It's a right for citizens, yes.
Do you have to do anything to do it?
Yes.
What do you have to do?
It depends on the state.
What do you have to do?
Sometimes you have to be at least 18 years old.
What do you have to do?
And in some places you have to have a government-issued ID.
What do you have to? You have to
be on the voter rolls?
Register. You have to register. So you have to register to a right. Is that an infringement?
Does the right to voting say shall not be infringed?
Oh, so this is just a semantic argument now.
No, it's not.
You believe voting rights can be infringed because it doesn't say specifically shall not be infringed.
Is it an infringement upon a 17-year-old's right to vote, since they don't have that right to vote?
No,
Oh, it's not an infringement on them?
No, absolutely not.
Why not?
Because you're the one making the argument, not me.
All right, so just a couple of things I noticed about what we just saw is Jon Stewart is being very persuasive here, and he's being very aggressive. That also kind of makes up for the second thing that I see, which is that he's speaking over the person he's talking to and not really letting them talk very much. However, I will give Jon Stewart some credit. He seems to be relatively informed, or at least relatively ready to go in these kind of situations, and he was so here. But the ultimate conversation is way more important than the stylistic points that Jon Stewart is scoring here. And the question is kind of like this: gun violence is rising, so what's the cause? Or, more importantly, what will stop it? And we hear two things from Jon Stewart at this point in time: that we need gun registries and we need universal background checks, and that Nathan Dahm is essentially a chaos agent if he stands against either one of those things. Now, I will be the first to admit that Nathan didn't really plead his case, but if he was going to plead it, he should have said something like this. What exactly would, let's just talk about a gun registry, solve? What does it really do at the end of the day? Would a gun registry stop a violent crime from happening? And the answer to that is obviously no. What does a gun registry actually solve? Well, a gun registry does what essentially a loan does. When you sign your name to the fact that you own a car, you are signing the fact that you own that car, and if you do not pay your bills, that car will be taken from you. And so the idea here is that essentially you're signing a registry, so then in the off chance the government decides to maybe go back and restrict certain types of guns, they can come back and take your guns from you. Because a registry doesn't really stop any real crimes from taking place. It just gives the government a list of people who have guns. What is the more valid concern is perhaps background checks. But you should know this: in every state in America, to buy a gun from a licensed dealer, you have to have a background check. You're not getting a gun without one. I just bought one not too long ago at my local Bass Pro Shop in a state that is incredibly liberal as far as its gun laws are concerned, and guess what I had to do? A background check. Guess what the Nashville shooter had to do before she acquired all of the guns that she used to kill a bunch of children and adults in Nashville? She did a background check. So the truth is that you have to have a background check everywhere, because especially if you're a felon, you can't own a gun. But what you don't have to have a background check for is when you're privately purchasing a gun. Let's say your brother has a gun or something and you want to purchase it from him. There are many states in which you still have to have a background check there, but not in all. And our state is one of them where you do not have to have one. I would be willing to argue, much to the dissatisfaction of people on my side of the aisle, that I think universal background checks have some merit. I want to make sure somebody who is criminally insane or has a history of some psychological issues doesn't have guns, but I also understand how that can be a very slippery slope. And if you're an honest person, you should too. And an honest person should also be willing to admit that universal background checks don't stop crimes. Again, the Nashville shooter purchased a gun and did so completely legally with a background check, and the vast majority of crimes are committed either with stolen guns, where you don't have to have a background check, or with guns that have been legally purchased using a background check. This is most, I would say, amusingly backed up, but it's not that amusing, in the fact that right around 2 years ago, when the House passed a law that there would be universal background checks, there was a crime committed in Atlanta, and the police came out and said that the man who committed this crime with this gun passed all background checks, and there's no way that background checks would actually have done anything in this case. And that's very true of most gun crimes. So hopefully we'll see that registries and background checks aren't necessarily going to stop crimes. And it wouldn't have in this situation with this 6th grader who was killed, because this individual was not of the legal age to actually own a gun. Oh, and I do have to make one last comment about gun registry and Jon's analogy about voting registry. I mean, it is Jon's party that believes that Republicans are trying to disenfranchise people from voting by simply asking for an ID. So maybe the Republican argument that You're trying to disenfranchise people from the Second Amendment by making them register their guns. Makes a little bit more sense on your side of the aisle than you think, John. And perhaps the Republican is a little bit more right, because no one's trying to disenfranchise people from voting, and there are people who are definitely trying to take guns. So we need to have a conversation, more importantly, more substantively, as to what will truly stop gun crimes like this from happening in the future. The conversation will go on as they try to dig into some of that. Check it out.
I'm saying even rights have responsibilities, and that within those responsibilities are responsibilities and order. Otherwise, it's chaotic. I'll go you one further. You want to ban drag show readings to children.
To minors, yes.
Why?
Why?
What are you protecting?
Why can we prohibit children from voting, those under 18 from voting?
Why are you banning
that?
Is that free speech? Are you infringing on that performer's free speech?
They can continue to exercise their free speech, just not in front of a child.
Why?
Because the government does have a responsibility to protect.
I'm sorry?
The government does have a responsibility in certain instances to protect children.
What's the leading cause of death amongst children in this country? And I'm going to give you a hint. It's not drag show readings to children.
Correct, yes.
So what is it?
I'm presuming you're going to say it's firearms.
No, I'm not going to say it like it's an opinion. That's what it is. It's firearms. More than cancer, more than car accidents. And what you're telling me is you don't mind infringing free speech to protect children from this amorphous thing that you think of. But when it comes to children that have died, you don't give a flying fuck to stop that, because that shall not be infringed. That is hypocrisy at its highest order.
Oh, I get it. Republicans are hypocrites because they only care about protecting kids from drag queen shows, but they don't care at all about kids who are being murdered. You know, we're the pro-life ones, by the way. Maybe you forgot that. But that is what is called a straw man, because these two things are in no way equivalent to each other, and they're not a good analogy one for another. Of course, Republicans care about kids being killed. This is just another attempt at an ad hominem, which Jon Stewart has done pretty well throughout this whole debate. And again, I'm not going to say that his prowess as a debater isn't on full display here, and he's not schooling Nathan. He truly is, but that's not because the truth is on his side here. Let's dig into the real question at the end of the day, which isn't should we protect kids from drag queen story hour? We should. Let's dig into the conversation as to why gun violence is increasing among kids and why now homicide by gun is the leading cause of death for children. This Pew Research poll released shows us, more generally speaking, about the data about gun violence in America, and not just among kids. And I found it very interesting, and I think you should pay attention to it. As you can see on the screen, there is a pie graph that kind of breaks down what is happening in terms of gun violence. And the vast majority of gun deaths in America happens by way of suicide. This is something that is never talked about by those on the left or the Democratic Party, more generally speaking. They want to just give you kind of raw statistics or raw data rather than to help you delineate that data. But the truth is, the vast majority of people who are killed with guns kill themselves. Why did they not mention that? Well, I happen to think it's inconvenient to their main talking point, which we'll really dig into here in a moment, which is that we need to quit talking about prayer, we need to talk about gun control. Yes, okay. If you look at this pie chart even further, you will notice that the vast majority of the gun deaths that happen that are not suicide happen with handguns. Now, this is about 97% happen with handguns and only 3% happen with quote-unquote assault weapons. But I don't know a single person on the left, no Democrats right now, who are rallying the troops to say that we should eliminate all handguns. But if you're truly interested in gun deaths and rising gun violence in America, you might say something about handguns, which shows that there may be something more to this at the end of the day. And I think I can prove to you what that might be in one final study that was done by the University of Chicago, and I'll throw it up on the screen for you now, and it says this: the household ownership of firearms has declined in recent decades. Table 1 shows that the 31% of households reported having a firearm in 2014, essentially tying with 2010 for the lowest level of gun ownership in the last 40-some years. This is a decline of about 17 percentage points from the peak ownership years of 1977 to 1980. Essentially, this survey proves this: that legal gun owners may have more guns than they ever have in history, and there may be more guns right now in America than anywhere else in the world, but that does not mean that there are more guns in more hands. It just means that legal gun owners are buying more guns, but not that gun ownership is rising. Hopefully that makes sense. Suffice to say, gun ownership is decreasing in the present, but gun crimes are increasing rapidly, and we have to answer the question, why? But I think Jon Stewart doesn't anywhere in this debate, and he can only bring up kind of some like red herring arguments and some straw man arguments in order to plead his case. Now, you're going to say cause and correlation, as I mentioned to you, what I think the actual cause is. But I think I have firmer ground to stand on than Jon Stewart does with universal background checks and registries, and thinking that that would actually solve anything. If those went up, all of a sudden gun crimes would go down. I don't think so. I think we've seen over and over again how that's not true. But in the present, what we're not considering is whether or not mental illness and whether or not a decrease in spirituality or religious adherence is the cause for some of what we're seeing. Because right now, we're seeing a major increase in mental illness and a major decrease in religious adherence as more and more people walk away from the church. I can't help but think that those two things are somehow correlated one to another. But the one thing we know for sure is that as we see gun crimes increase, we cannot necessarily pin that on the back of the fact that we have such ubiquitous gun laws here in America that allow for people to get guns, because guns were owned by more people back in the past, more so than they are today. So it isn't the increase of guns that's doing it, but something is increasing that's making all of this take place. And again, I would argue mental illness is increasing at the same time, concurrently almost, and you can see this on graphs, concurrently almost with the decline of religious attendance and religious adherence. All that to say this: when the liberals want to tell you that we need to get rid of prayers and we need to get rid of guns, I think they may be missing the real thing that could solve this crisis at the end of the day. If we're really going to solve this problem, we have to get to the heart of the issue. And at the heart of the issue may be the human soul. And unless we're willing to talk about that, I don't think anything is going to change. All right, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks so much for watching. If this was helpful to you, I'd love to hear from you down in the comments section. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and to go with God.